Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating paradox. When we think about the top and bottom of our world, it's pretty easy to picture them as identical, frozen wastelands. But the reality? It is completely different. Both the North and South poles are absolutely freezing, they're both currently melting, and they're literally critical to our planet's survival. Yet, the international community treats them in drastically different ways. One is this fiercely protected sanctuary, while the other, well, it's on the brink of an armed resource dash. So let's get into it.
Take just a second to imagine the stark, isolated beauty of these polar environments. We're talking about a world of truly frigid extremes. But right behind these breathtaking icy landscapes lie incredibly heavy geopolitical stakes. We're going to explore exactly why these regions are inextricably linked to the rest of the globe, and why the laws governing them, or honestly, the lack thereof, actually matter to every single one of us.
Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with A Tale of Two Poles, then look at life at the extremes, examine hard law versus soft law, dive right into the melting resource grab, and finish up by discussing protecting our polar future.
All right, Section 1, A Tale of Two Poles, Geography and Populations.
We so often group the Arctic and Antarctic together, but physically speaking, they are exact opposites. It's a fundamental difference that really sets the stage for everything else. The Arctic is essentially a frozen ocean, completely surrounded by sovereign nations. Because of that, it's home to various peoples, including entire indigenous communities, who have relied on this environment to survive for generations. The Antarctic, though, it's the exact reverse. It's a massive, isolated continent completely surrounded by ocean. And because of that incredible geographic and political isolation, there is absolutely no permanent human population down there.
Moving on to Section 2, Life at the Extremes, Ecosystems and Adaptation.
What's really cool about this geography is how it shaped the highly adapted biology in these extreme environments. Down south in the Antarctic, the survival feats are just unbelievable. Most of the animal population hangs out in or around the icy waters rather than on the barren land. Take the majestic emperor penguin, for example. To survive, the males endure a grueling 9-week winter fast. No food at all. They rely entirely on thick fat reserves just to keep a single egg warm during the absolute coldest, darkest months on Earth. It's wild. Above them, you've got wandering albatrosses soaring around with massive 3-meter wingspans, and the oceans below are just teeming with diverse species of whales and seals.
And if we zoom in from a giant albatross down to the microscopic level, we find absolute biological marvels. At the very base of the food web, you've got these dense swarms of tiny shrimp-like krill. Then there's the icefish. This creature is remarkable. It doesn't even have red blood cells. It transports oxygen entirely through its blood plasma. And get this, there's a tiny flea-like insect called the Antarctic springtail that actually survives the freezing temperatures because it has literal natural antifreeze in its blood. The adaptation here is just mind-blowing.
So, on to Section 3, Hard Law versus Soft Law, Governing the Ice.
How exactly do we protect these incredible creatures? Well, the crucial point here is how the international community uses completely contrasting legal frameworks for these two very different ecosystems. The Antarctic is protected by what we call hard law. Back in 1991, the parties to the Antarctic Treaty adopted the Madrid Protocol. This explicitly designates the entire continent as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science. It strictly bans sovereign claims by any nation, it completely prevents militarization, and it establishes really robust goals to protect the environment. Because there's no native human population and no single owner, this treaty was actually able to lock down the southern pole solely for peaceful scientific research.
But in stark contrast, the Arctic totally lacks a single unifying treaty. Because it's an ocean surrounded by land, nations use the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea to claim what are called exclusive economic zones, or EEZs. This is essentially an area extending 200 nautical miles from a coast where a country has sovereign rights over the natural resources. You can probably see where this is going. This legal framework actually encourages surrounding nations to push for sovereign control over the ocean's resources, effectively dividing up the Arctic rather than preserving it as a unified reserve. So without a binding treaty, who's actually watching over the North Pole? Well, it's overseen by the Arctic Council. Think of it as a soft law advisory body made up of various specialized working groups. They conduct vital environmental research on everything, from flora and fauna to marine environments to monitoring pollutants. They do fantastic work, but here is the crucial takeaway. They have zero actual power to enforce binding laws. The participating countries are not legally obligated to change their actions based on the Council's findings.
That legal vulnerability up north leads us directly into Section 4, the melting resource grab, a looming crisis.
Let's look at how climate change is acting as a rapid catalyst here. The harsh reality of global warming is that the Arctic ice cap is melting, and it's melting fast. Because of this, historically impassable shortcuts, like the fabled Northwest Passage through Canada and the Northeast Passage near Russia, are suddenly opening up. Sure, this allows goods to travel thousands of miles faster between Europe and Asia, but it brings a massive threat. Inexperienced crews or unregulated commercial vessels navigating really shallow, difficult waters. The stakes here get terrifyingly real. Imagine a devastating oil or chemical spill from a single-hulled container ship in these freezing waters. It would be practically impossible to clean up, posing an absolute existential threat to the fragile wildlife that breeds there. And with the ice melting, the Arctic is no longer just seen as a frozen barrier. It's suddenly being viewed as a massive treasure trove of unexploited natural resources, particularly oil and gas. Nations are actively preparing to carve up this vast resource pie. Competition is quickly replacing conservation, as countries wake up to the massive economic potential hidden just beneath the melting ice. We are already seeing this geopolitical reality play out in real time. For instance, back in the summer of 2007, Russia famously planted its flag on the Lomonosov Ridge seabed in the Arctic Ocean. Why? Well, they did it to assert that the ridge is a natural continuation of their continental shelf, trying to claim sovereign control over those resource-rich territories. Now, obviously, planting a flag doesn't magically rewrite international law, but it serves as an incredibly powerful symbol of the mad dash for resources that's quietly escalating among Arctic nations.
Which brings us to our final section, protecting our polar future, the call to action.
The stark contrast we've explored today between a fiercely protected southern nature reserve and a northern resource battleground holds immense implications for the future of our planet. A quote from Jonas Støre, the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs back in 2008, perfectly anchors the gravity of this situation. He stated, "Developments in our polar regions are both a serious warning and a call to action." The extreme changes happening at the poles, they aren't isolated events. These regions drive environmental changes globally. A warming Arctic means changing global weather patterns, rising sea levels, and devastating impacts that will be felt absolutely everywhere on Earth. So what's the solution here? Many environmental advocates argue that before a massive, irreversible land grab occurs, we've got to use the incredible successes of the Antarctic Treaty System as a model. Yes, the Arctic has indigenous populations and totally different geographic realities, but the fundamental framework of binding environmental protection, basically prioritizing the planet over petroleum, is desperately needed to establish a legally binding framework for the North before it's too late.
I want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. As the ice continues to melt and access increases, will the world prioritize the protection of the fragile Arctic environment, or will it fall victim to an armed mad dash for newly exposed natural resources? At the end of the day, will humanity choose to protect our polar future, or will the promise of hidden wealth ultimately win out? Thank you so much for exploring this vital topic with me today.